Opponents of President Trump's policies are turning to the judiciary to try to block the president on multiple fronts, including his efforts to deport migrants, to downsize the federal workforce, impose tariffs, reduce world aid, and the list goes on. Tonight, we want to dig into two overarching questions. First, should courts stand in the way of policy solutions from a president that was elected to solve policy problems? Perhaps the bigger question is, can courts act as a check on the president? What if he chooses to ignore a Supreme Court order? But first, let's deal with the question of whether or not he should. Rick.
Well, I don't think it's correct to say should he block or should they block, because really what they're doing is judging whether or not the president's actions are legal, and that's their role in checks and balances. So to the extent that the president is doing something that they believe is illegal, it is really their responsibility, and that's how our system works. Now, I think the important question is what happens if Supreme Court, and I think it's right to talk about the Supreme Court because most of these questions are going to get pushed through the courts, and the Trump administration has run very quickly to the Supreme Court looking for relief here. What happens if they do make a decision that he doesn't like and he defies it? It's important to note that during his first administration, he did comply with court orders, but certainly it appears that he's talking very differently this time. Ultimately, the Supreme Court, can do things like hold people in contempt, although the president can pardon people who've been held in contempt, and the Supreme Court has already gone forward and increased the broader immunity that the president has from prosecution when he says he's doing his jobs. So I think they are sort of boxing themselves in a little. So it isn't clear exactly what they will be able to do to enforce this if Trump ignores them.
Yeah, I hear what you said about the question of whether should, but the position of the Trump administration is that the president, as does the legislative branch and also the judiciary, has certain powers within our constitutional scheme of government, and that the judiciary is standing in the way of that. And so that is why we're asking the question, should courts, because the Trump administration is saying that they should not. Anirban, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that this conflict between the different branches is inevitable. This is the way our system is set up. But what's new about, and this to Rick's point, new about the regressive right is this idea of flooding the zone, that is sending out a huge amount of executive orders, sometimes even conflicting ones, such that people can't really keep up in terms of where to litigate, how to litigate, and how much to litigate. And that is creating a lot of confusion. But to answer your question, so far, the Trump administration also, maybe in some bad faith, has been in some ways been able to say that, hey, we are following the court. Now, what can be done? Of course, contempt is one thing, but that is up to the Justice Department, right? Another one is the writ of mandamus, which is again compelling someone to, and this was how the judicial review, was created. Anyway, so the writ of mandamus is it compels an authority, an official to disperse discretionary fund or fulfill their ministerial duties. But on the whole, if Trump and its administration completely disregards the Supreme Court's order, it will be definitely a constitutional crisis. And that's a area we don't actually know until we find out what will happen. But I do think a large part of American citizens, including conservatives, would be very put off by this because there are conservatives, many of them, who believe in the rule of law, who does not believe in this kind of unitary executive and all-powerful executive. So we have to see.
Yeah, exactly. And so the court, and as you indicated, certainly not the court, but the public could respond. But it's interesting that you mentioned the writ of mandamus because that is what was at issue in the very first Marbury versus Madison case,
that's right.
in which the court established judicial review, the power to tell the president what it can do. But in that case, Chief Justice Marshall backed away from going all the way because he was fearful of what the Jefferson administration would do. So Tara, what would happen if the Supreme Court balks and doesn't really want to have that fight?
Well, one would hope is that if the court goes to a certain point makes it very clear, okay, Mr. President, if you don't carry out this order, we are going to issue a contempt order for the president. I believe that they think that if we go far enough and make it very clear, Mr. President, we will hold you in contempt, that will sort of push Trump back because, of course, we know Trump likes to be very popular. And I'm not sure that President Trump really wants to have a fight with a Supreme Court that he needs down the road to back him up as he makes other decisions.
Exactly. What I find striking here also is I agree with you, standing on his own, he might not. However, congressional Republicans are saying, we have your back. Yes. We will eliminate district courts. We will change budgets. We will do whatever. And so, Rick, do you think that might push Trump to do more than, as Tara said, he ordinarily would?
I think it could, because I was going to say, you know, if the contempt orders don't work, then Congress also has the ability to act. But we've seen they've already been moving to try to weaken the judiciary, and they've already given up some of their own powers in allowing the executive branch to become stronger. So, you know, this threat of a constitutional crisis does grow a little bit. Again, I'm hopeful that public opinion would help keep him in check a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Congress has the power to reorganize the courts, right? But I mean, easier said than done. Do we have the 60 votes in Senate to do that? And to what extent many conservatives and many Republicans would say, no, we don't want to, you know, gut the courts because we belong to swing districts. We belong to people. We have to listen to the people. And, you know, it's very good that you brought up the Marbury versus Madison, and the court walked a very fine line, right? It said that, yes, you have to give the writ of mandamus, but I cannot be compelled to do so because the Congress has not given me that authority. So Supreme Court has this kind of legal ways by which it can hold the order, but it also can kind of shield itself from immediate attack from, you know, Republicans and so on. So, you know, either way, it is an important thing, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing about Chief Justice Marshall that allowed him to establish a power that the Constitution didn't provide, is that he was very savvy politically. And so one of the commentators whom we read in preparation for today said that the only real recourse for ensuring that the court's orders are enforced are Congress, and failing that, the public. And so, Tara, ultimately, should Democrats really be, or opponents of these orders, really be making their case to the public to try to rally the public, because that's where the Supreme Court seems to back off?
Absolutely. We've talked on this show before about the Democrats' inability to explain in a very simple way to the public why the current administration's policies and all of these executive orders, why it is so dangerous, and why you want to make sure we maintain checks and balances. Not simply that we have them, but that each branch actually is willing to undertake its duties and say to the president, no, Mr. President, we have the power of the purse. These are your powers.
The other thing I wanted to mention, and this is very extreme, you know, really the enforcement mechanism for most courts is law enforcement. They're the ones who go out and carry out this. So to this extent, it would be U.S. Marshals, but they're part of the Treasury. I mean, this is really walking down a road that I hope we don't go down. If you look at other countries, when there's overstepping the executive, it's sometimes the military that has to step in. This could get very messy, but I'm hopeful that we'll come to some compromise before then.